Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Revolve, our webcast for consciousness and culture. I'm happy to have with me Hannah Close. Hannah, welcome to Revolve.
Thank you.
Hannah, you're a curator for transformative education at the platform Artwire, and you are soon holding a course there, which is called a course on kinship that really got our attention. And we thought your work on kinship seems to be interesting and very important for our time. And it's already interesting enough to call a course about kinship. How did you get to be interested to have a seminar on kinship?
So the idea came about in quite an indirect way. I was hiking in November in Scotland, and I ended up on the Isle of Iona. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's like an inner Hebridean island. And while I was there, I was staying in a kind of pop-up community. And I came across this book by the Irish poet John O'Donoghue called Eternal Echoes. And it was about the human hunger to belong. And I read it while I was staying in this community. And it was really something about the word belonging just kept coming back around and coming back around. And I really felt that a lot of people refer to the period we're in as a kind of meaning crisis or a meta crisis, or, you know, whichever label you want. But for me, reading that book and in that moment and in that community at that time, I felt like it was a belonging crisis. Like I felt like actually, if we look at what precedes meaning, it's belonging. Because belonging, for me, at least speaking from my own experience, belonging creates meaning. That is so important to our experience of being human. And so I kind of focused on this theme of belonging, and I'm studying engaged ecology at Schumacher College. And we look a lot at indigenous cosmology there and community and ways to live together. And I kind of felt kinship was the unifying theme that kind of wove together themes of belonging, community, relationality, indigeneity, of these different things. So that's basically the origin story of the project. But one thing to note is that the course it's a course, but it's more of a collective inquiry. Like it's less kind of about saying, hey, this is what kinship is. I know what kinship is. I'm going to teach you how to be in kinship. But it's trying to ask the necessary questions and just kind of dive deeper into relationship. Because to me, it seems as though relationship and belonging and all of these things are kind of, relationship just feels very alive for me at the moment. And the way in which we become alive is through relationship. And then kinship is a particular form of relationship, I think. Yeah.
You said something very peculiar. You're referring to the meaning crisis that many people are talking about. And you said for you, the meaning crisis is a crisis of relationship and a crisis of belonging. That's, I would say, an unusual way of thinking about the meaning crisis to be a crisis of belonging. How so? What do you mean?
So, based on a number of personal conversations with activists and academics and family and just people from various walks of life, it kind of to me, at least what I was picking up on in the tensions that these were having with our moment was that they felt like they didn't belong, at least not completely. Like they didn't feel at home with themselves, with their community, with their job, you know, with the earth, with all of these ecosystems within the earth. What I was hearing, at least in the kind of undercurrents of my conversations with people, was that something's missing in my relationships. And I resonated with that because I felt that too. So I was trying to make sure that I wasn't just, you know, projecting my own longing to belong into these conversations. I mean, that was certainly there, but yeah, this sense of lack and of longing for belonging was really coming through. And to me, belonging does precede meaning. Belonging is meaning for me personally.
Isn't this a very foundational question of our modern being in the world? That basically, since we kind of are not in a medieval spiritual context, that we feel we are in a cosmos that is kind of huge, scientifically accessible, but not really giving us any kind of metaphysical meaning. That since we entered our modern culture, that this question of belonging is something that's just part of our culture, and that maybe belonging is something that is more a feeling that we should grow out of, in the sense that maybe we have to mature that this cosmos is as it is, and we can create meaning, but the cosmos is just this big natural event, and to think there's meaning in that is maybe a naive sense, and that's kind of our modern attitude towards world life.
Yeah, I do think that I definitely resonate with the idea that we create our own meaning. I kind of see belonging as, because it can be very sentimental and like very romanticized, and as you said, naive. It can be very also bound up with the need for attachment and all of the kind of cravings and feelings of lack that come with that impulse, and the longing to belong, as John O'Donohue says. It can put us into a state of always feeling somehow incomplete. But I do see it slightly differently to that. I kind of relate belonging to being present somehow, belonging in the now, in the moment, in the kind of belonging way, not trying to belong over there or with that person in this way, but instead just waking up to the moment you're in now and belonging in that, in quite a simple way, if that makes sense.
But when you talk about belonging to what? What does it mean to belong?
Good question. What does it mean to belong? I can't give a straight answer to that. But it feels like something to belong. Like it feels, there's something, it's hard to say. It feels like something to belong. It feels enlivening somehow. It feels affirming to belong. It's a hard question. I don't know the answer, but I know how it feels in myself.
Because I can relate to the indigenous cultures, there's a strong sense of belonging. There's one tribe there's one family. This is basically the world I know, and we have a shared sense of meaning that we share. But now in a global reality that we're living in, where we share this planet with so many cultures, with so many interpretations what it means to be human, and we have very different relationships to nature, to each other. In this multiplicity, it's not so easy to say, okay, I can belong to my friends, I can belong to my family, but I'm very aware that this is just a very small fraction of the world that I live in. And when we tap into the internet, there's such an amount of whatever that we are confronted with. How can I get a sense of belonging in this time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of why I feel that globalization and the internet and this idea of we need a bigger we. I'm not sure if I feel entirely on board with things, because I don't think it's possible for a human being to embody those relationships. Like, I think we can conceive of them intellectually and we can vocalize them, but I don't think, again, just based on my own experience, that it is possible for us to relate in these abstract, vast ways. I mean, that said, there have been times when, particularly in plant medicine ceremonies, where I have felt a belonging in the cosmos, and I've had, ecstatic, mystical experiences of union with a force greater than myself. But that is not, I don't feel that sense of belonging in the everyday. And what I would like the Kinship project to do is kind of to say, okay, whoa, let's stop with the everything is connected and we're all this giant global village and giant we, because I don't think it's necessarily a helpful narrative. And actually, let's just slow down, step back. What is in our immediate present environment? What can we actually relate to? What can we actually embody? How can we actually participate? And I feel like a lot of people feel a sense of frustration because their activism, they can't extend far enough. And I think this, trying to have an impact that big is, well, kind of impossible, possible, but a recipe for frustration and a sense of not belonging.
Yeah. You said it's not a helpful narrative. What is a helpful narrative?
Yeah, good question.
What could be a helpful narrative? How can we create kinship, belonging in this situation that we're in? We are in a global situation, and we are in this world. So how can we find a narrative that creates that?
I don't think we can. I used to do a lot of work on story and myth and reimagining the future and designing a new narrative, whereas now I kind of it's not that I think that work is irrelevant or ineffective, but the impulse towards creating new stories is also another way of taking us out of the present. And it's necessary and it needs to be part of the ecosystem of change. But I feel personally that we can sometimes get stuck in that, oh, we're going to do it better this time and we're going to reimagine the future and we're going to, one in which that we have kinship and da-da-da-da-da. And yet we're just enacting the same lack of presence and the same desire for this idealized kind of semi-utopian narrative that has this structure and this arc and this trajectory that we can kind of walk into and inhabit and create. And I think we're imaginative beings and we live through metaphor. So I don't doubt that narratives and the narrative impulse is very much at play. I just feel that we need to cultivate a relationship to what is imminent, rather than trying to, again, transcend the moment in favor of a better moment.
The German poet Goethe had a very interesting response to the French Revolution, and it reminded me of what you were saying. Basically, in the beginning, he was very much in favor of the French Revolution, but then when Robespierre happened and the guillotine happened, and he and his friend were very, very shocked about where this idealistic utopian impulses went and how brutal they also got. And his response was that we have to be aware what are the real circles that we are in relationship with, instead of being concerned about something that I only can have an abstract relationship with. Can I honor the reality of my real relationship and focus on that where I do have an effect in? So he was trying to refocus us to see belonging means to be in real relationships, not in abstract relationships. And of course, he was also living in a small dukedom in Germany where he could live that in some way. He was not living in a huge empire or anything. But there's something which I still find relevant to honor, that we have to see who are we affecting, who are we affected by, and honor the reality of where relationships are not something abstract, but something concrete. And that as being at least a starting point to belong again, to experience kinship again. And you remind me a little bit when I listen to you to this approach. Can you see that as being connected to your way of thinking?
Yes, absolutely. It's this kind of going back to the kind of theme of immanence and immediacy, and inhabiting where you are, and this kind of, it seems like there's a kind of tension around the idea of going local again, and trying to move away from this global village concept and actually just tending to the garden you can tend to, like looking after your own little corner of the universe and just trying to do that to the best of your ability, including the relationships in that context. Yeah, the tension that causes to become more individualistic than we already are, and to kind of hoard and continue with these narratives of scarcity. But at the same time, I think it would be the most, I think it's all we can do, at least all we can do well, to tend to, it's also more enlivening, because we live in abstraction so much already, and we try and extend our experience so much already, and so much is lost in that reaching out and trying to go beyond. And as I get older, I kind of am really starting to draw in and acquaint better with my interiority, at the same time as becoming more porous to the world around me. So it's this kind of both and situation. That is also, one of the core themes of the course. It's like, how can we navigate the human, like very human need and desire for nearness and distance and solitude and connection and autonomy and relationality, because those seem like universal needs, but they're entirely contradictory of each other, and yet we must hold both. And one of those is connecting to the larger cosmos, world, community, whatever, and being interior and inward.
Hmm. There's also an interesting new development in developmental psychology, where the evolution of consciousness and maturity is has been very much seen in the context of holding more and more complexity. And this is, I think, still important. But there are some new voices who basically say there's something that we miss here, and that is place, concreteness. So being really a full human being is not just to hold more and more complexity, but really to have a place where concreteness can grow. So kinship doesn't live just in huge complexities. It also needs a particularity, a place that is specific. And it seems that's also where your thinking is going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, I feel as though kinship is an invitation into place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's such something that has become, has been a big question for me recently, is what is the difference between place and space? Like, have you ever really thought about that? And, you know, in Indigenous cosmology, yes, you know, place is an entirely different phenomenon, thing, whatever. Whereas space is this kind of lacking in context, lacking in identity, a kind of like amorphous in-betweenness. And just speaking from my own experience, for the last few years especially, I've been very kind of painfully aware of myself as a person growing up in Britain and not really feeling connected to the place, to the culture, to the whole, you know, sensibility of Britishness. It was an embarrassment for me for a while because I felt like the whole place was lacking in so much that was meaningful to me. And so when I lived in Ireland for the first year of the pandemic, and that was the first time in my life that I felt connected to a place, and not just in terms of, you know, projecting my poetic romanticism onto the landscape, but actually standing on the ground and looking at the Atlantic and just, yeah, it's one of those feelings you can't describe. But something was reciprocated in my relationship with that place. There was some sort of feedback going on, and I wasn't just standing, you know, on top of the place or the space, but I was kind of inhabiting it, and it was inhabiting me. Yeah, and so that was another kind of impulse behind the Kinship project. But we don't really, especially now with so many people moving remote work and digital nomad and becoming more and more interconnected, we kind of skate across the surface of the earth without really staying and becoming intimate with one place. At least most of my network do that. And there's something gained, but there's something really lost in that as well.
But isn't it the case, at least I have the feeling it is, that there is, because also of the internet and the global reality that we live in, that we remember that we need something to be rooted in. That there is also a sense, particularly because there's this vastness of connections that we have with the internet, that place, as you're describing it, is something that we need even more so as a counterweight to hold what the internet brings us anyway, and we somehow can't avoid it. But particularly because this is the case, we need something that even more so allows us to be rooted, and also rooted in something that is more than human. I mean, you were talking about the Atlantic, you're talking about the soil. I I'm originally from Austria, and I have very strong relationship to the Alps. And there is also something that before and beyond our technological global society, that there is a kinship and belonging that is needed, particularly because we are so technological. Not necessarily, not to get rid of the technology, which would be romantic and illusionary, but because we need a counterweight in order to live it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a when you use the word rooted, for me that is synonymous with belonging. Mm-hmm. To be rooted, to be a root in the ground is, where your rootiness, is in its optimal state. You are in your kind of context. Yeah, and definitely to act as a counterweight. There's one of the core questions for myself personally, and also in the kinship course, is when we are not Indigenous, what are we? How can we belong? Mm-hmm. And there's something I have sensed again in my kind of conversations with various people around the kind of fetishizing that happens around indigeneity, particularly from Westerners who really crave what Indigenous people have and what they know and how they are. And, rightly so in many ways. And this whole concept of indigeneity, it's so entangled with rootedness and place and belonging and lineage and ancestry and communion with the more than human and all of these things. And it's like there's a sense that Westerners or moderns or whatever you want to call them are inherently devoid of the capacity to belong to a place, because we are so globalized, because we are so heavily dependent on technology. And that's kind of one of the core questions. And I would really love to shift away from this idea that because we live in quite a troubled culture, that somehow erases our human essence and and our kind of status as organisms that are just as organic and fleshy, as an Indigenous person, and that we still have our human senses and we still have our creaturely bodies. It's just, there's a lot of obscurity and there's a lot of abstraction that's kind of weighing down on us, that stops us from inhabiting that and rooting, as you say.
And isn't there also a different form of kinship and belonging that we are ironically finding through technology? What I mean is, because in some way we are living in a time where a geography ended, you at least can say so, because the people you choose to share time with, as we are talking right now, middle of Germany and Britain, but we are sharing a space. We sharing something that we have together right now, although it's based on technology. And I experienced there's a new possibility of kinship and belonging with people that choose each other, which has not been possible before in this way. But it is in a very different way than my feeling rooted in landscape and with the trees I love and the lakes I love and the mountains I love. That's part two, but there is also a network of people, in fact, around the globe, that I feel I belong to because we share soul, perspectives, life stories, narratives. We share all different kinds, but we share things. And this is something that hasn't been the case in this way ever before in our human history. And we still have to find out what this really means. But it is also a new form of being rooted in relationship, in belonging, in kinship, that we have to find out, and that is not against technology. In fact, technology allows us to experience that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important point. It's this it's kind of one of those both and situations, or one of those middle way situations where it's like, how are we using technology to facilitate our relationships? For example, you and I having this conversation now has a much a different quality to, say, people arguing on Twitter. You know, they're still relating, they're still having a dialogue, if you could call it that, maybe not. And one of the guiding questions I had around the course was, how can we reconceive kinship in the context of modernity? So that obviously includes things like Zoom, you know, all of these things. It's one thing I really didn't want to do was to say, hey, we need to abolish technology and go back to, you know, living in a tribal context, because it's just not possible. And I don't think it's necessarily desirable either. And there is so much generative potential in the ways in which we relate online. For example, one of the previous course with Advaya had 52 people from 52 different countries participating, which is just, you know, impossible otherwise. So again, it seems like one of those situations to me in which maybe it's not a useful frame, but something is lost and something is gained. And perhaps if we lean too much on our online relationships and don't nourish those in our daily lives, or vice versa, something or someone suffers. And if there's a way in which we can bring that into some kind of equilibrium, in which both forms of relating are inhabited in a healthy and generative way, then there's room for technology, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I experience it really in this way, that we have to learn how both go together, because there is also a yearning for concreteness, where my body can be, where I have my walk along a creek, and that's something that I feel I really need, because I have so many relationships online. At the same time, I feel that there is also something that we share online that is as concrete as nature can be concrete. Your image is frozen right now, so I'm not sure if you are still there.
Hello?
Yeah, now you're back.
Good. Sorry.
Yes, I stopped the recording for a moment. What I said, there is also a learning, I feel, how to bring these two dimensions together, because there's the concreteness of place, where also my body can be, but there is also the concreteness of relationship, of human relationships online, that shares the same concreteness. Because these relationships, particularly also my experience with Zoom, is they are as concrete as relationships are that I have offline. And how can we learn this, doing this together?
Yeah, so the kind of thinking about what you would call the concreteness of being in place or relating to place physically, and then the concreteness of human relationships that are facilitated and cultivated online around the globe. It's interesting to think about even the metaphor of concreteness, because our relationship to place is almost something we can grasp. I mean, we can touch our immediate environment and kind of have feedback from the immediate environment and say, hey, okay, this is there, I am here. And at the same time, we can't necessarily grasp or touch our relationship with others around the globe and through Zoom, but there is a sense of concreteness, as you say. There is a sense of belonging, and it's like this connection between. I wouldn't say it's just connection between sharing the same sentiments or thoughts or rallying around a particular idea. There's something deeper than that, and I have had very concrete relationships and experiences just from online. In fact, I have 2 pen pals who I've never met, and I have the most incredible, generative, joyful relationships with them online, just discussions, and just knowing that they're there, even though they're on the other side of the world. There is something concrete. There is the kind of sense of, kinship, of knowing there is this person, even just the knowledge of this person without being in proximity to them, for me, generates a sense of kinship. And of course, it would be nice if they were here as well, with me, having a cup of tea and talking about these things, but they're not, and that's okay. And it doesn't necessarily diminish the relationship. So yeah, it's interesting to think just the metaphor of concreteness is interesting.
But also what you just said, that although they are on the other side of the globe, you experience it as kinship and belonging. Because when you were looking for, there's something deeper, it's not just rallying around an idea. Maybe this deeper is exactly this experience of kinship and belonging. And I mean, of course, we can then talk what this is about, but the fact that this is there, that we create, I would say, networks of belonging. And we also have to learn this right now, because in some way we have a freedom that we never had to basically choose who do I want to belong to and what are my criteria of belonging. It can be all kind of stuff. It can be good stuff or not so good stuff. But there can be a culture where, because we again start to honor the very thing that you're talking about, kinship, belonging, and get a deeper human sense what this is. And it's not abstract ideas. It's not kind of a political something. It is very deep human qualities, or even more than human qualities. I don't know. That because we start to honor this again, we also can create very new ways of exactly that, kinship and belonging.
Yeah, it's this. There's something about kinship that is very particular. It isn't just a relationship. It is a particular type of relationship that has certain qualities of reciprocity, feedback, respect, sensuous awareness, all of these things. And it's going back to talking about online relationships. If you can bring those qualities into your online relationships, which you totally can, with a bit of mindfulness and awareness, then who's to say that you can't have kinship online? And then thinking, back to my kind of pen pals, why is it that I have such a unique relationship and such a strong sense of kinship and belonging with them, and why certain other interactions online I don't? It's because there is we're making an investment into the relationship. We're not just turning up to it and kind of, we're participating very actively in the relationship so that it has become what it has become. We're not passive. And a lot of online relationships and physical relationships are very passive, and they're very reactionary. And there's something about kinship that is both natural and easeful, but at the same time, intentional as well.
And I would say there's one particular thing they are not. They're not instrumental. And the internet as a technological sphere has a very instrumental foundation. It's created out of an instrumental sentiment. And maybe it's exactly that we have to learn to free ourselves from all of that and see that these deep human qualities of relatedness, of kinship, of belonging can be also brought to this new sphere that we are pioneering. The human species is pioneering in a new continent called the technological noosphere, however you want to call it. And to free ourselves from this technological instrumental sentiment and see, no, there's something different. We also can live here, but we have to learn again the value of relatedness, what it really means, of kinship, what it always meant. And in that sense, are also able to be here in this new virtual world in a way that deeply respects our humanness. And maybe this is also why a course like yours is important, because that's not what you usually think about when you think about the internet, belonging, kinship. But as we are talking, I really see how important it is to relearn it in order to be able to also live it here.
Yeah, there is something I feel quite strongly about that. Kinship is a form. So a lot of the course is inspired by my studies on animism at Schumacher College, and there are various ways of saying what animism is and various words for it. But there's a risk, but there's not a risk. I suppose it's just part of the ecosystem of relationships that we, in our online relating and in our human communities, we need to be able to weave in the more than human. And it doesn't necessarily mean this kind of romantic nature connection kind of, put a potted plant next to the screen kind of thing. But there's just a risk that we become too much about rebuilding our human relationships without at the same time, in parallel, inhabiting this plurality of other relationships, whether it's with the more than human or anything else. And so I kind of want to bring that in, because kinship is very much goes beyond just the human.
Yeah. It's an experience I had several times. I'm doing online events all over the globe, which I find related to what you're saying. And it's a very interesting experience, because you are here, and then there's a group of other people here, maybe a small group, maybe a big group. You're not sitting just in different countries, you're sitting in different continents, in different time zones. In one time zones, the sun is rising, in the other time zone, the sun is setting. And one is a hot climate, one is a cold climate. And all of a sudden, I have a concrete awareness of Earth that I did not have before. In several times, we made something like a global ritual where we stayed together for 24 hours. And I had inputs from all time zones for the 24 hours. And I still remember that afterwards, I had a sense of this huge body called Earth that turned around itself in this time. And it was not my idea of Earth. It was a direct experience of a more than human reality that we all are living on. So ironically, this technological sphere allowed me to have a connection to this huge body called Earth that before I had much more on a theoretical level, but at least it feels like a essential relationship of this huge body that we're all sitting on from different places, and it's turning around itself as we're talking. And to bring this together is something that we also have to learn with this new technology, that belonging is something that we need to exercise because it's part of our humanness.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's not a fixed state. It's not like, okay, now I belong. You know, I've achieved belonging. I'm in a state of belonging. You know, kinship itself is, you know, defined as a noun, but actually it's, you know, it's not a belief system. It's not a method. It's a verb. It's that you can only do it. You can only do belonging. You know, I love Donna Haraway's idea of what she calls worlding with. Mm-hmm. You know, and the Center for Humans and Nature, my friend Gavin at the Center for Humans and Nature, he talks about kinning. You know, we're kinning. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, especially, you know, I've been in this trap myself where I go, aha, kinship, this is it. This is the answer. This is the balm. This is the remedy. And it becomes another prescriptive, and as you said, like instrumental contradiction to what the whole thing is about. And there's a lot of irony, or what could be, many could see as being ironic, that we're doing a course about kinship online. Mm-hmm. You know, and I'm totally aware that kind of exists, and it's like, okay, can we just be with that? Like, how do we feel about that? Can we be playful with that, rather than just say, oh no, we've done it wrong? You know, like, this is kinship and this is not kinship, and it looks like this and it doesn't look like this. Yeah.
As we are also coming to the end of our time here, when does your course start?
It starts on the 15th of March and runs until the 5th of May.
And we also have the link both in the invitation and on the website, so people can click there. And after this conversation, even more so, I'm deeply convinced that investigating what kinship and relatedness, belonging, means in our time is something that that's really important for us to look into. So thank you very much for the work. Thanks for this conversation.
Thanks, Thomas.